Welcome to the Veriff Voices podcast, a collection of conversations with leaders from across the industry, sharing tips and valuable insight into shaping the future of online identity. This podcast is brought to you by the people of Veriff, rebuilding trust in the digital world. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Veriff Voices. This is the podcast where we talk about fraud, compliance, technology, and all things related to digital identity and returning trust to the internet. Today's episode is going to be touching on a number of things, actually, but so synthetic identities are definitely going to be in there. Probably more so about sort of shared intelligence, actually, so why collaboration is the key to fighting fraud. And joining me to do so is Bruce Ackerman, who is head of global sales at Grid. Grid are a verification as a service AI orchestrator and a long-term partner of Veriff, actually. So I'm always very excited to talk to the team there. There's always some really cool stuff going on with the work that they're doing, and it's a good chance for us to sort of dive into that and find out what they're up to. So, Bruce, welcome first of all, and thank you for joining us. Give us a little bit of an intro to yourself, if that's okay. A little bit of kind of the sort of the highlights from your experience, your background, your journey to where you've got to so far, and maybe just touch on a little bit about what sort of some of the work that Grid does as well.
Yeah, so Bruce Ackerman, I'm head of global sales at Grid. I started out on the compliance side, on the data side, in the early days of a company called WorldCheck, KYC, AML, PEP screening, and migrated over through the years, building up the company, selling it off to the IDV side, identity verification. And I've seen that grow and transform over the years. So I guess I've been doing this for about 17 years. What drew me to Grid? As you said, verification as a service. What I really like about Grid is it's an orchestration platform that is, let's say, plug-in or service or data or solution agnostic. We have a long-standing partnership with Veriff, which we value highly. We'll go to a country and they'll go, we need this data service. We can plug it right in. Somebody will come to us and say, I am using this particular company for email verification, even though we plugged in a different company. We can just unplug what's in there and plug it in. So very flexible. And the other thing that really attracted me to join Grid was everybody else out there who's built these orchestration platforms force you to use not only their IDV, but their IDV first in the process. We're saying to a customer, look, you know your business better than we do. So we have a customer that all they do is email verification. They don't start with IDV. They don't even want to do IDV. And the last piece I'll say is we are the only company, we are certified resellers of all three credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. And that's been incredibly transformative for our business as people are starting to say, wait, we'd like to verify all this against credit bureau data.
It's interesting. I think just you sort of touched on a few things there that I think we'll sort of dive into a little bit more as we talk here. But the sort of multi-layered approach to all of this stuff, I think, and sort of the flexibility, I think, that sort of Grid and Veriff by extension can bring is that every business is different, right? I mean, everyone has their own unique processes, and to sort of force your way onto your customers is a strange way of going about things, I think. So I think Grid is definitely going about this the right way, and sort of having that flexibility to adapt to customer need, I think, is really cool, actually. So let's dive straight into it then. I think one of the big things that's come up, it's been huge news over the last couple of years, really, is this kind of piece around synthetic identities and the sort of the AI-generated, AI-powered fraud, I should say. What is it about them that makes them so hard to detect compared to sort of the traditional types of fraud, would you say? What are you kind of seeing from your customers about in that sort of realm?
Yeah, well, this incredible processing power that you have, you can create an ID that even before synthetic fraud, most people are not qualified to look at an ID and determine if it's real or fake. I mean, obviously, if you show somebody an ID, for me, and it's got a picture of Mickey Mouse on there, it's very easy. And again, this is also assuming that the people looking at the ID are paying attention, which in many environments, there's such volume, they're just glancing at it and passing it right through. But this AI processing power, it gives the ability to create an identity that is almost indeterminate. It's almost impossible to identify. I remember when I first started in this space, KBA, knowledge-based authentication was a big thing. And if you got a question wrong, you were a fraudster. Well, now the thought process is if you get all the questions right, you're a fraudster, because the questions are so bizarre that they're like, most people wouldn't remember this information. So it's the fraudsters doing this incredible data mining of every piece of your life. And what a change there. So you can't just go, hey, let me just look at your ID and have you scan it in and go, yeah, this everything's in alignment. You have to go way beyond that.
Yeah, it's one of the things that comes up quite a lot when we're talking to customers of ours and prospects and so on. Is that the traditional forms of fighting fraud, as you said, knowledge based piece there, kind of the passwords, I suppose, is another one as well. It's very heavily dependent on the user to do quite a lot of work, like be that remembering information or storing passwords somewhere and so on. And they don't actually kind of solve the problem. It is a method of getting into an account, but someone could quite easily have access to your device, and then in which case, you are no longer the account holder, which I think is, one of the reasons that drove, Veriff to do what it does, and put the sort of the onus, if you like, on somebody's identity and making that something that is the piece that's of value, because that's very hard to forge. I mean, it's there is a number of things that you can. There are synthetic identities, as we're talking about here, that can sort of try to do that, but with the sort of the multi-layered approach that we mentioned right at the beginning there, if you've got the biometric piece that links off to a government database that sort of verifies the document in that way, that's often a way to sort of really sort of create something that is, as I say, the identity being very valuable and your main means of getting into an account. And I think also there is kind of a user experience piece to all of this as well, which is, it's if you're just having a selfie taken, that's much less stress on the user than it is if they're having to remember passcodes, if they're remembering, answers to questions and so on. But
That you touch on a good point. That's obviously another problem too in that user experience, because we talk to customers and they balance fraud versus new customers. And every customer, again, that's different. We're going to let a certain amount of fraud through because we don't want to reject a legitimate customer, because that user experience, there is a lot of drop off. And then of course the other problem is, you and I probably, demonstrate the power of, authenticating an ID almost, daily. So, if we're holding an ID, we might hold it, the right way. Well, the person who only does this once or twice a year, they just grab onto that ID and their thumb is across it. So then you take a picture and the system says, whatever, poor image, please retake. Well, the problem is these studies have shown if that's all you tell people, they just keep doing the same thing. So you need to tell them, put it down on the counter, or, hold it on the edges. Then, of course, you get that friction. And I mean, there are so many factors that come into play in this. I don't think people really put enough thought into that.
yeah, I think you're right. And just talking about the sort of the threat of synthetic identities, then, what are you seeing from kind of your customer base? How concerned are businesses about this at the moment? I think just take like the end user out of it for the time being. What is the sort of the level of fear, I suppose, with what that you're seeing from your customer base?
So it depends on the dollar value of their transaction. The customers that have very high value, high dollar value transactions will spend much more to try to block those attacks. And typically the number of attacks is less, but much more sophisticated. The people where it's a smaller dollar value transaction, they're getting tens of thousands of hits on like almost hourly, because, it's one thing to steal, $1 million, or what if you could steal $10 from 100,000, accounts? And that's a concern for them. And then again, our customers come back to, but what if we reject too many people that are real? So, how do we tune the system so that we're happy and our customers are happy? So look, at the end of the day, anytime I hear somebody go, hey, we can eliminate fraud, I'm like, look, you might as well be out there peddling alchemy, turning lead into gold, because it's not possible. I
Yeah,
mean, there's a reason we're in business, and the fraudsters are just as sophisticated as we are.
yeah.
And as we adapt and tune the system, they do the same thing.
Yeah. I think that there is a way to eliminate all fraud altogether, and that's to let no customers through. That's the front of maybe the answer to that question, which is
I mean, look, actually, I will give you an example with a very big telecom. I sat in a meeting with them once, and at their 5,000 plus retail stores, they readily admit they lose $1 billion a year in fraud. And we said, well, if you do this, you'll eliminate that. And they looked at us and said, you're 100% right. I'm like, great, and let's do it. And they go, we'll never get it through. And I go, why? And they go, because this is a sales driven organization. And the sales department has said, if you do that, we will lose $5 billion in sales. so they're willing to eat the billion in
Yeah,
loss.
yeah, and I think that's always the equation that it comes down to, isn't it? I suppose where you find that acceptable level of risk that you're prepared to tolerate within your business, and I think sometimes I think fraudsters know this too, and they kind of operate within that margin, and they sort of know if we do too much here, it's going to push it into make this unsustainable. But
And I'm sure they do test attacks too. Hey, let's see how far we can push the envelope with, XYZ bank.
yes, absolutely.
And they'll start to figure it out, and then they'll come in from a different direction. And yeah, I mean, it's amazing. These are not like three guys that work selling, I don't know, aircraft parts, and on the weekend spend like an hour doing some fraud. This is what people don't realize. This is their full time
Yeah,
job.
yeah, absolutely, and I think that the level of it now as well. I mean, we've definitely spoken before in this podcast around, the barrier to entry to become a fraudster now has now been removed. Effectively, like anybody can go out and set up this fraud as a service. You can buy the tools relatively cheaply. You can set up and get a very sophisticated fraud ring going very easily, very quickly. But actually, it's almost a $1 billion corporation in and of itself. I think some of these, especially in some of the state sponsored rings and things like that we've encountered. These are proper business operations that have multiple hundreds and thousands of people working for them. To kind of doing this stuff. So it's big business in and of itself. And do you think that? Do you think the fraudsters are winning? Basically, I think that's the sort of the short question here. But do you think that businesses are doing enough to sort of prevent these attacks, or spending enough money to sort of to have the processes in place to keep themselves safe?
Well, again, the problem with the problem is, are they spending enough money? I mean, you obviously can't spend all your profit. Then there's no point. Are they doing enough? I mean, possibly. I think what they need to do is they need to do things differently. And I think you need to be in a mindset that you have to continually do things differently. I don't mean every hour, but you have to, look, you know, companies change strategy. Well, it's the same thing with this. You can't install Grid, or, with Veriff or just Veriff and go, hey, I'm just going to walk away and forget about it. You have to constantly monitor what's going on, fine tune the system, look at what's getting through, and decide, what else can I do? Maybe a business buys our solution, and the first thing in the process is Veriff, but maybe 6 months from now, it's the third step in the process. And I don't think most businesses are doing that. And I see that because a lot of times we'll call on a potential customer, and they'll go, I'm using these guys and it's fine. It's just because they don't want to put the effort in. They don't want to look at anything new. And, you know,
Okay, just sort of just taking that conversation on a little bit further. Then I think one of the things I mentioned at the kickoff at the beginning was around sort of collaboration between businesses. Just as a sort of a fraud fighting tactic in and of itself, I suppose. Do you think that's something that is possible? First of all, I guess, and is it something that you're seeing any kind of moves towards already in terms of this sort of collaborative effort to fight fraud?
I think that if that went on, that would be phenomenal. Is it possible? I think in the perfect world, and I really do believe that at the end of the day, it's a zero-sum game. So, if a fraudster is attacking my bank, at a certain point, they're probably going to think they might be onto me, so they're going to stop, and then they're going to go attack your bank. So, if I catch someone or some entity, and I let you know, you're going to be able to stop them, and you're going to catch someone, and you're going to let me know. There's no sharing of customers or internal details. The problem is, it's business, and nobody at the end of the day really trusts each other. I mean, I've seen organizations get together. There's a group here in the States, and the seven biggest banks are members, and they all sit around and talk, but they really don't work together. And I've talked to people, and I talked to somebody who goes to all their meetings from one bank, and he was told, we've been given specific instructions not to speak and disclose anything, just to sit there and listen. And another bank talks all the time. And at the end of the day, they don't share the information. But yes, if there was a central database of all of this fraudulent activity globally, you'd start to shut it down. You'd never eliminate it because, again, the fraudsters would come up with something new, but you would shut it down much quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think then? I mean, what's kind of frustrating about this issue, I think, is that this kind of mechanism does exist already. I mean, obviously here at Veriff we have our, our cross-linking technology, for example, that works behind the scenes, and if we see that one of our customers is being pinged with a number of attacks, be they in the gaming sector, we can alert the rest of our customers that this is the case. So we're kind of on red alert for that particular person. So in a sense, there is a kind of a community there, although it's one that's kind of entered into unknowingly to a certain extent because it's, as I say, it's happening behind the scenes.
Right,
But
but only your customers though,
very
right?
true, very
And
true.
let's
Yes,
say,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
look, I don't know how many customers Veriff has, but let's say Veriff has 1,000 customers. That might be, 0.5% of the total number of customers globally. So
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, what do you think that's kind of stopping banks, or not even we say banks, but sort of financial institutions more generally, I suppose. Is it just that sort of competitive angle that you mentioned there, or is there a sort of a legal piece that they're worried about? What do you think is the sort of the main stopping factor?
I think it's a competitive angle. I think there's a trust issue there. I think it's very difficult to get somebody to buy into the fact that, in the United States, I'll just use Wells Fargo and Bank of America. I think it's very difficult to convince the people on either side, hey, we are not sharing customer information. So it's not like you're going to learn who their customers are and you can target them. We're just sharing a signal of what's going on so that you can block that signal. And of course, the other part of it too is they all have to get on the same system, or they all have to pull from the same system, and then that's a whole argument unto itself. Hey, we bought Veriff. Hey, we bought these guys. Well, we think ours is better, and they're going to spend 5 years debating. Well, we all got to switch up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is, isn't it? It is what you mentioned there, sort of, that competitive ego, I guess, but also the sort of process part of it, which is all having to reach that agreement. I think. What in your opinion does a truly collaborative kind of anti-fraud ecosystem look like? Do you think?
So I think you got two parts of it from the vendor side, meaning you and I, multiple pieces. Maybe it's email verification, maybe it's device fingerprinting, verifying their ID. Maybe sometimes throwing in different things. Don't just go for a driver's license. You have to do a passport or, verify a credit card. Maybe verify some information against their credit bureau data. That's the one side of it. The other side of it is on the customer side, sharing, as you said, and you guys do it just at Veriff, but sharing all this information, sharing not the information on the customer, no PII, just sharing what the attacks look like, what they're going after, and maybe even going so far as allowing our solutions to be able to automatically, it's kind of like a lock system, flip the gate. Instead of just notifying them, going and look, and honestly, if they would do it, I think we could charge for that service and go, hey guys, we're seeing this. We're just going to flip it. So it's going to go this way instead of this way. And you're going to block some of that. We've actually joked about this for years. I went to a customer once and they said, hey, we're experiencing about $30 million a year in fraud. And we sold them a solution and they said, we've got it down to $12 million. And I think maybe what we sold them was $600,000 a year. And my joke was, I would have preferred to give them the solution for free and said, hey, I'll charge you 10% of the savings. So that would have been 3 times as much, right? And if you could actually figure out a way to monitor that, you could monetize it that way. And to me, it'll probably work out to our favor, but you just have to figure out. And by the way, I'm just throwing 10% out there. You have to figure out the right numbers. But sometimes people would pay more, sometimes they'd pay a little less, but ultimately it would balance out.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I think that's a really interesting point that you've hit on there. Is that fraud is gonna cost you at some point. It's just a matter of when are you prepared to pay at the beginning of the journey to try and root it out and try and prevent it and minimize those losses, or do you want to pay at the end of it when you're potentially you'll have to reimburse customers, you might have to pay fines to regulators. There's the kind of the reputational kind of damage, which is really hard to quantify in a number, but that's going to be potentially lost customers in the future as well that you've got there. So you are going to have to
Yeah.
pay at some point, right, to fraudsters. It's just a matter of when you're going to do that and how much you're willing to pay, and when, I suppose, is the
I
key part of
agree.
it. But when we're talking about this stuff, fraud, as you've said correctly a couple of times, it does move very quickly. Fraudsters are very opportunistic. They can jump on things and they can find sort of gaps in systems very, very quickly. Why do you think it takes so long for financial institutions to respond to this stuff? Is it just a matter of their processes move much slower, or is there more to it than that?
I think that's what it is. I mean, look, I can tell you from calling on some very large banks and it taking multiple years to win the contract, where I can call on an organization, not a bank, just as big, and we can get it done much quicker. I think just financial institutions, and it's not an insult or a knock, just by the way they operate and the legacy, it is very difficult to and what they're dealing with, and people's money, it's just a very slow process. I mean, I've never seen a large financial institution, after 2 or 3 meetings and within 2 months, yeah, they, sign a multi-million-dollar contract.
Yeah, we all wish that would be the case.
Yes, and by the way, it's one of the reasons that we call on financial institutions, but at Grid, we're calling on a lot of other areas that they move much quicker. And part of it is because the way their transactions move, so they need to make a decision faster. So it's kind of a balance. Like I can't have the entire sales team focus on like the top 50 banks in the world and say to our CEO, "Hey, look, you're not getting any sales for 3 years. Spend a certain percentage of time working on that, and then we work on things that we can move much quicker."
Yeah, we certainly see it. I know in the UK we have kind of the open banking sort of ecosystem, if you like, which has spawned a number of different very specialized apps and sort of platforms that focus on very niche areas of financial services. And so payments is an obvious one, and those companies just they are by their nature, by the way they've evolved, they're very digital first. They respond to things very quickly. They know how to sort of break something and build it quicker and that kind of thing. Then
Yeah, money transfer as well. It's an
yeah,
area that we
absolutely.
focus in. Global money transfer, they react very quick because it's once and done, and
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And do you think that where would you see this going? I mean, in terms of the sharing of data specifically, and kind of that's kind of safety in numbers approach. Do you see anything changing here? I mean, it feels like something that we've spoken about in our world for the last 5 years. Do you think the next 5 years will be the same? We'll just be talking about it again, or do you think anything will actually happen?
I'm always hopeful, and I talk to people all the time who go, "I have a system that does this," but yeah, I've been talking about this for probably longer than 5 years, and unfortunately, I think it's going to continue to be these discussions. It just just think about it. How do you get everybody to the table to trust each other when they're competing for the same customers all the time? Even though, yes, we could sit here and talk about this all day long and how it's different, ultimately it's their decision, and that's tough. So I think we're probably gonna see it continue to talk about. Now, I think the conversations are gonna change because with AI and the way things are moving, I think these customers are gonna start to ask for new ways to do things, and I think what's gonna happen is the conversation's gonna keep going back to, if I could get you and these other banks to the table and you guys cooperated, it'd be great if every bank did it, but you're the, 7 largest banks in the US. And look, they all know each other. I think at some point, some of them will start reaching out to each other going, "Hey, let's have a discussion about this." But they're going to have to really come to that decision on their own and come back to us and say, "Okay, let's do it." We're never going to be able to sell them on it.
Yeah, I think you're right too. Do you think there could be some external pressure from, say, for government? Say, I mean, is that something that you could foresee happening, or is that another kind of thing that is just pie in the sky?
I mean, it'd be nice. I haven't heard of that yet. I mean, I guess, if I play devil's advocate, if I'm the government, if you care about your citizens, that'd be the plus side, put that pressure on. On the other hand, if you're in a capitalistic society, you're like, "Hey, if they want to lose money, I mean, it's look, it's kind of like in sports and you have an owner of a sports team and he spends an enormous amount of money building a great team. And, and let's say I'm a fan of that team, and then I hear my friends who are the fans of another team, and they're like, "Well, you guys are better." Because I'm like, "Hey, your owner can spend just as much money if he wants." And by the
Yeah.
way, our guy spends that much money, and there's no guarantee that his team is going to win. So I'm actually grateful that he does that. So I get to see a good product out there. I think it's the same thing here. The government's probably weighing, can we force them to spend all this money? And I would guess multinational corporations, if the government puts pressure, are going to go back and go, "Well, fine, you want me to do that? Then why don't you fund some of this?"
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's very true. It does all come back to that, doesn't it? I suppose. And what do you think is the sort of worst case scenario here? It's if no financial institution does anything, if they just continue as they are, what do you see happening? What do you think is it sort of just going to continuation of what we are now? Is it going to get much worse? So you mentioned the AI threat in the last
We
answer,
have,
but
well,
what do you think?
the first thing is we have incredible job security, right? I mean, if somebody builds something to eliminate fraud, I mean, we're done,
Yeah,
right?
true.
Except to maintain the solution. Worse is a relative term. I think it's just going to keep evolving. So people are going to maybe compare today's attacks to 5 years ago, and I don't know necessarily that it's worse. I think it's just going to be different. So again, that's going to create new opportunities for our organizations. It means that Veriff and Grid have to keep evolving and be creative. I think you're going to see technologies, new things pop up. People are going to also look at this. Sometimes I think an old school approach is better to take exactly what we're doing today, but go, hey, everybody's doing it in this order. Let's mix that order up. And when we mix that order up, we can combat fraud better.
Yeah, I think that the flexibility angle to this actually is one that's is often overlooked. Actually, I think that there are a range of tools at your disposal, and I think the way and the order in which you use them is obviously going to differ depending on what business you're in and what industry you're in, what geos you're targeting, and so on. But I think there's certain we mentioned about that sort of the balance in weighing up risk that some organisations have. They're going to be different each time. Some organizations will want to look at every single transaction and see what's going on there. Some maybe over a certain value, possibly, or if there is a pattern there that they are seeing, i.e., they've had maybe 3 or 4 transactions on the same day. Maybe we want to look at that and see that there's some verification that's needed there. So I think those kind of trigger events are different for everybody, aren't they?
You bring up actually a very good point too. And one of the things that we do with Veriff with our customers they are not locked into doing every single transaction the same way. You can dynamically build workflows. So you might say, hey, if it's a transaction up to $100, go down this path. If it's over $100 to $1,000, go down this path. So that's part of the flexibility piece that's what I see. And again, that's part of what brought me to this organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there is a way of sort of framing fighting fraud as a revenue driver? I mean, I think it's often, the way that we've talked about it today, and I think most people would talk about it, is it's kind of a cost sink to a business, right? It's something, we're going to have to pay for this to try and prevent it. But is there an argument that actually, if you do this correctly, you are showing that you have, robust measures in place? That's going to filter through to your brand messaging and your brand sort of the idea that people have of your brand, and it actually might be a customer acquisition strategy in the end. Is that sort of something that's a bit too far fetched, or is that something you're seeing?
I don't think it's far fetched. I've actually had that discussion with customers and said, look, you could do it. And I'm not a marketing person, I'm sales, but you could do a entire campaign around, hey, we're an organization that, sees whatever 2% of our revenue, fraud, and we've implemented solutions to get it down to 1%. Or, to me, I look at it like revenue. If you're losing, $30 million a year, and all of a sudden you cut that down to 12, well, that's $18 million back, to the top line. So I actually do think that's the way to approach this. I mean, I've sat and again, but yes, everybody looks at it because all they're doing is paying. And I'm like, you really should look at what you're saving. Now again, part of the problem though is because I did have this discussion with one prospective customer, and they go, there is no way we're ever going to publicly admit how much fraud we're seeing. So, again, is it pie in the sky? No, I think you have to get somebody on the other side of the table to think as creatively as we are in trying to sell them. And if you can find those people, then you can move it forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had a really interesting conversation on this podcast a couple of episodes ago, actually, with a crypto company who were dealing with their compliance team. And that's what we were primarily there for as a KYC provider. But what the sort of the knock-on effect of working with us is that their marketing team were able to launch these big kind of customer acquisition campaigns fully, with the confidence that they knew that Veriff was able to deal with this massive spike in volumes that they were going to get all of a sudden and things like that. So all of a sudden there is a link to marketing there, was a link to sales there, which I thought was really interesting and not really an angle I'd heard before or really considered. I think it was one of those ones that we're very used to dealing with fraud teams, with compliance teams, with risk teams, and so on. But actually, there is a sort of a business angle to this, which is maybe one that we hadn't considered.
I think that's great. I think if you can have a conversation and somebody goes, "Hey, if we do a marketing campaign like this, we're going to get so many prospective customers coming to us that our fraud's going to increase." And we're like, "Yeah, but if we have a solution that can combat the fraud, then the only outcome is increased revenue."
Yeah, yeah,
I
exactly,
think that's a
exactly.
gr I like that. I'm gonna steal that, by the way, with our
Yeah,
sales team.
just give me a cut of the takings, whatever you
I
make, and
will.
we'll
I
we'll call
will.
it that way. Yeah.
I'll make sure we footnote that it came from Chris Hooper.
Yeah, quite right too. Let's talk a little bit about the sort of the partnership between Grid and Veriff then, just to sort of finish things off. What are you seeing right now? How is it that what is Grid right, doing in this sort of space, specifically around sort of synthetic identities and that kind of thing? How are you sort of seeing it and sort of framing it to your customer base or your prospects?
So, the customers know. I mean, that's the great part. I mean, it's not like we have to go in and educate them on synthetic fraud. They know it's happening because it's happening to them every day. We have to get them in the beginning of the conversation to admit that it's a problem, because you always get customers who go, "Oh, this isn't a problem for us." And I'm like, "Really? Because you'd be the only company on planet Earth that this is not a problem for." The partnership between the two companies has been phenomenal. I can tell you that the people on the Veriff side are incredibly responsive. Anything that we need, we reach out to several of the people that handle the relationship between our two companies. When we have a very unique situation and we need specialized pricing, or we've talked about tweaking certain things. Patrick can certainly talk to the technical side of that more, but I know he's had conversations where a customer was having an issue, and Patrick said, "If Veriff could allow us to do this," and I'm like, "Well, that's for you to deal with." And Patrick will reach out to somebody at Veriff, and within a day or so, he'll get back to me and go, "We're set." And so we have tremendous collaboration between the sales and the technical side here, which pushes over to you guys. Yeah, it's been a great partnership.
Oh, that's great to hear, and I think that's such an important piece to it actually as well. I mean, you can talk about the kind of the accuracy and the speed of the solution and the product working as it should do and everything else, but really, as we've said a couple of times on this conversation, every business is unique, and every business is going to have its unique tailoring, I think. And one of the things we really try and push here at Veriff, I think, is is exactly that. That sort of we're trying to be as responsive as possible to what the customer needs are, because ultimately there's never going to be like an off the shelf solution for this stuff. It's always going to be a unique flow that you're building into.
We don't hide it. When our customers ask who our IDV, they'll go, "Hey, did you build your own?" We're like, "No, we partnered with Veriff." We're like, "Why should we reinvent the wheel? They've got a great solution." I know Veriff will be at Money 2020. Will you personally be there?
I won't be. No, no. But I think it's we've got a team going there, so we've got we'll have some our sponsorship there and everything else. So
Okay,
it's
I'll
yeah,
stop by the
it's
booth. I'll be there.
yeah, please do, please do. I think we'd love to see you in person as well. And I know the team will be there and everything else. I think we'll have solution engineers there. We've got sales folks there. We've got a couple of marketing people as well. So there'll be the full set you can meet there. What can we expect to see from Grid? And, if we're looking sort of next 12 months, next 24 months, what's kind of on the horizon for you guys? Where do you think are going to be the big places that you're showing up and that kind of thing?
I think the thing that's going to really stand out with Grid is the fact that we work with the credit agencies. That is a game changer. I've had conversations with very large customers that I've dealt with in the past, that as I kind of give them the quick 10-minute overview of Grid, and they go, "Wait a second. I could actually take information and ping, say, Experian or Equifax or TransUnion." And I go, "Yes." And they're like, "Well, what do you need?" And I'm like, "Well, it's up to you. Do you want to give me a name, an address, a driver, And that's fascinating. The other thing is that you see from Grid, and we're starting to do press releases. We're going to areas around the world where we don't see a lot of people going, because we're still selling obviously in a traditional market, like, in the United States, but obviously we're in there and there's 50 other companies in there, and we have to try to explain to them how we're different. We're going to areas around the world, which I won't talk about. You could look internally at Veriff, but that we're getting a lot of traction. And our view is that by the time that particular country or region, that everybody becomes aware, we're not going to have every customer, but we'll have a foothold. That I think what will happen is, when other companies go in there, people will go, well, let me check about Grid before I think about going with you guys. Yeah, which has made our job, I say, different, not easier, but because we still have challenges to deal with. And there's a reason that nobody's gone into these areas. We have to stand up our solution on servers within that country, or they're asking us for very specific government databases, and we have to go through that. But Patrick and his team have built a system that's flexible enough that he can do that.
I think it's such a good call out, actually, because I think that the modern world being what it is, it's most businesses these days are global, and you have to have that kind of or have aspirations to be global, I would think, and it's one of those things that you need to, if you do want to move into a new region, you have to have some set of tools that work there, and I think that's the great thing about Grid and about Veriff. So, our document database is massive. I think it's the biggest on the market, and it covers basically any country you can think of. I couldn't tell you personally the difference between a Nigerian driving license from 2014 versus one from 2016, but our document database can, and I think that's the great thing about it, is that you don't have to have that expertise in house. You can go through a Grid or whatever it may be to find to link into that. So I think that
Exactly.
that's really interesting to hear, and I'm very excited about that. And I think just that probably takes us to about time, actually, Bruce. I don't want to sort of say that is probably a good time to finish on, but it also leads into maybe we should talk again in 12 months' time, 6 months' time, just to see how you guys are getting on.
Anytime you want to have a conversation, look, if you want to just check in with me, we can have a check in, every month, every other month. And if something unique comes up, I'd be glad to join again and talk about that specifically.
Thank you again, Bruce, for joining us. I know that you're incredibly busy, so to take the time, I think is really, really appreciated. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Veriff. Identity verification made simple. Learn more at veriff.com.